You are imprisoned by something that doesn't exist. Rumi discovered this truth and asked the question that can shatter every limitation you've ever believed about yourself. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? But here's what makes this teaching dangerous. Once you see the door, once you realize you were never actually trapped, everything you thought you knew about struggle, effort, and spiritual seeking changes forever. This question appears in Rumi's masterwork, the Masnavi, and it represents one of the most revolutionary insights in spiritual history. When Rumi asks why you stay in prison, he's not talking about physical confinement. He's pointing to the invisible walls that keep most people trapped in limitation, struggle, and separation from their true nature. These walls seem so real, so solid, that we spend our entire lives trying to break through them, never realizing they were never there in the first place. The prison Rumi describes is built from thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions about who you are and what's possible for you. The bars are made of fear, doubt, and the stories you tell yourself about your limitations. The lock is your identification with the small self, the ego that believes it's separate from divine consciousness. But here's the shocking truth that Rumi discovered. The door to this prison has always been wide open. You could walk out at any moment. In the Masnavi, Rumi tells the story of a man who spent years in what he believed was a locked cell. Day after day, he rattled the bars, pleaded for freedom, and despaired of ever escaping his confinement. One day, a wise visitor came to see him and asked a simple question. "Have you tried the door?" The prisoner looked confused. He had never even considered that there might be a door, let alone one that might be unlocked. When he finally looked, he discovered that what he had assumed was a solid wall was actually an open doorway. He had been free all along. This story reveals the fundamental illusion that keeps most people trapped in suffering. We assume we are limited, that we need to work hard to earn freedom, that enlightenment is something we must achieve through years of effort and practice. But Rumi teaches that freedom is our natural state. We are not imprisoned beings seeking liberation. We are already free beings who have forgotten our true nature. The question, "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?" is not meant to shame or blame. It's meant to wake you up to a reality you may have overlooked. Rumi understood that most people stay in their self-created prisons not because they have to, but because they don't realize they have a choice. The door to freedom is always available, but we've become so accustomed to our limitations that we can't see it. In the Masnavi, Rumi explains that this prison is created by what he calls the false self, the collection of thoughts, memories, and identities that we mistake for who we really are. This false self is always seeking, always struggling, always feeling incomplete. It creates elaborate stories about why freedom is impossible, why enlightenment is only for special people, why you need to fix yourself before you can be happy. But Rumi reveals that seeking itself is often what keeps the prison door closed. When you believe you need to seek freedom, you're assuming you don't already have it. When you try to improve yourself, you're confirming the belief that you're not good enough as you are. When you work to achieve enlightenment, you're reinforcing the idea that you're separate from divine consciousness. This is the dangerous part of Rumi's teaching. Once you truly understand that the door is open, that freedom is your birthright, that you don't need to earn what you already are, the entire spiritual marketplace collapses. Why would you need techniques, practices, or teachers if you're already free? Why would you pay for courses on how to find yourself if you are never lost? Rumi doesn't dismiss spiritual practices, but he puts them in their proper context. In the Masnavi, he explains that practices are like exercises for someone who has forgotten how to walk. They're not meant to give you something you don't have. They're meant to remind you of what you've always been. The moment you remember how to walk, you don't need the exercises anymore. The open door that Rumi points to is the recognition of your true nature. In the Masnavi, he describes this true nature as pure consciousness, unlimited awareness, divine presence expressing itself as individual experience. You are not a person who sometimes experiences consciousness. You are consciousness itself, temporarily appearing as a person. This recognition doesn't come through thinking or analyzing. It comes through what Rumi calls looking with the eye of the heart. The eye of the heart sees beyond the illusions created by the mind. It sees through the stories of limitation and separation. It recognizes the open door that the mind insists isn't there. In one passage of the Masnavi, Rumi describes a prisoner who spent so long in his cell that he began to love his chains. They became familiar, comfortable, even precious to him. When freedom was offered, he refused it because he couldn't imagine life without his limitations. This is perhaps the most tragic aspect of the human condition. We often choose our prisons because they're familiar, even when the door is standing wide open. The chains Rumi describes are our attachments to being small, limited, struggling beings. We identify so strongly with our problems, our personality, our story of who we are, that freedom feels like death. And in a way, it is. When you walk through the open door, the person you thought you were doesn't survive the journey. What emerges is something far greater than any personality could ever be. Rumi teaches that this death is not something to fear, but something to celebrate. In the Masnavi, he writes about the joy of the soul when it realizes its true nature. It's like a bird that has spent its entire life in a cage, convinced it couldn't fly, suddenly discovering that the cage door was never locked. The moment of recognition is both shocking and hilarious. How could something so obvious be overlooked for so long? The practical implication of Rumi's teaching is radical. If the door is already open, if freedom is already yours, then the entire approach to spiritual life changes. Instead of working to achieve something, you learn to stop preventing what's already happening. Instead of trying to become enlightened, you stop pretending to be limited. Instead of seeking God, you stop hiding from the divine presence that's already here. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop growing. In the Masnavi, Rumi describes enlightened beings as incredibly active and creative, but their action comes from freedom rather than prison. They're not trying to escape anything or achieve anything. They're expressing their true nature spontaneously and joyfully. The question, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open, becomes a constant invitation to check whether you're living from freedom or limitation. Every time you feel stuck, struggling, or separate, you can ask this question. Every time you believe you need to earn love, achieve worth, or prove yourself, you can remember the open door. Rumi warns that seeing the open door is one thing, but walking through it is another. The mind will offer countless reasons why you should stay in the familiar prison. It will tell you that freedom is dangerous, that you're not ready, that you need more preparation. But Rumi teaches that readiness is not required. The door is open for everyone, regardless of their spiritual resume. In the final analysis, Rumi's question reveals that imprisonment is always a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Every moment, you're choosing between the open door of freedom and the familiar walls of limitation. Most people choose the walls because they're visible, understandable, and give the ego something to work with. The open door offers no handholds for the ego, no sense of personal achievement, no story of struggle and victory. But for those brave enough to walk through, Rumi promises something infinitely more valuable than any story the ego could create. He promises the recognition of what you've always been, the freedom you've always had, and the peace that comes from knowing you were never actually in prison. The door has always been open. The only question is, are you ready to stop pretending it's not? This is not a teaching you can understand with the mind alone. It's a recognition that must be lived, experienced, embodied. Rumi's question is not meant to be answered intellectually. It's meant to point you toward a direct experience of the freedom that has always been available to you. The moment you truly see the open door, everything changes. Not because anything new has been added to your life, but because the illusion of imprisonment has been seen through. You realize you are never trapped, never limited, never separate from the infinite consciousness that is your true nature. The prison was a mirage, and the door was always open. Rumi's teaching is dangerous because it undermines every system based on the belief that you are limited and need to be fixed. It reveals that the seeking itself often perpetuates the very sense of separation it claims to be trying to heal. It shows that freedom is not a reward for spiritual achievement, but the natural state. That's revealed when false limitations are released. The question remains, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? The answer can only come from you, and it can only come through the direct recognition of what Rumi saw, that you have always been free and the door has always been open. All that's required is the willingness to stop believing in the walls that were never really there.